All right, Saagar, what are you looking at?
Well, the most stark metric that exists in a civilized society is this: are we living or are we dying? It sounds trite, but it became a given in the Western society after the Second World War that life expectancy would just simply rise over time with technological progress. More technology, more pills, more medical breakthroughs, longer life, right? Well, for a while, that mostly did hold throughout the boom years of the US economy. But a darker story started to take hold in the mid-2000s as the heart of America began to slowly erode. It took a decade for the consequences of Iraq, the financial crisis, globalization, and the slow-rolling opioid crisis to finally manifest in data. The very first hints at what was happening showed up in 2015, when for the first time in many years, life expectancy in the United States declined, just slightly, 78.9 years to 78.8. Yes, it was a blip, but it was a flashing red light to people who read just a little bit further, and they realized that the age-adjusted death rate in the US also had increased from 724 deaths per 100,000 to 733 in 2015. That year is when everything started to accelerate. Most people didn't even take notice in 2015, and it continued with business as usual. But then in 2016, in the middle of the 2016 election, where the opioid crisis became a flashpoint in the data, it shocked the entire world. Life expectancy in the United States officially declined 78.9 years to 78.8 in the course of 1 year. The worst part was that the deaths especially rose amongst those aged less than 65. Cause of death was up across the board: Alzheimer's, respiratory disease, kidney disease, diabetes, opioid-related deaths, and sadly, suicide. From that point forward, the same headline every single year. Life expectancy declines again and again. One of the most realizations was the prolonged trend of life expectancy decline was the worst the United States had seen since 1918 and World War I. That was when we had the Spanish flu, and that was in 2017. That was the first year where data from the drug overdoses rose so starkly, and they counted amongst the main causes of death for people under the age of 65, on top of systemic health effects I already mentioned. Now, the reason I'm taking you through this history is because it's important to set the table before COVID hits. Before it happened, we were already not just sick, but deeply sick, the sickest as a nation in 100 years. And then came a disease that disproportionately killed the unhealthiest amongst us, the fattest, the old, the sick. We then responded to that disease with policies that exacerbated other causes of death, skyrocketing opioids during the lockdown, as well as massive increase in alcohol and drug abuse and obesity. The butcher's bill is now in full view, and the results are heartbreaking. U.S. life expectancy between 2020 and 2021 dropped by 3 full years in the United States, the largest 2-year sustained drop in over a century. Now, of course, the pandemic was a big part of the drop, and that's what the media is focusing on. But when you dig deeper into the data, you see an acceleration of the multifaceted picture. The pandemic disproportionately killed the old and the sick. That was a given. The acceleration, though, of terrible health conditions and substance abuse is just as big, if not a bigger story. The major non-pandemic related causes of death include heart disease, chronic liver disease, cirrhosis, accidental death, drug overdose. Consider all of those. Every single one has been accelerating in Western society over the last 2 decades. Heart disease afflicts the obese. Liver disease and cirrhosis, major sign of alcohol abuse. Accidental death and drug overdose, of course, driven by fentanyl. Crisis all across the country. In fact, for young people amongst whom the decline is accelerating, the cause is even more stark. Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death for people in the prime age of their lives, from 18 to 45. Previously, it was thought to be simply accidental deaths, like car accidents. The reason it's important to understand this slow-lowering catastrophe is to reject any media framing of this phenomenon. It's not the pandemic. The trends were already here. The pandemic wiped out the most vulnerable amongst us, but there are a hell of a lot of people who might have survived COVID but are on their way to a coffin a lot earlier than they should be. This will be the central fight for our civilization in the next 20 years. Already, the media is billing this as a COVID-only story, pointing to the fact that life expectancy also dipped in 1993 because of the AIDS crisis. The facts, though, of course, show that life expectancy was well declining ahead of COVID. If it had to bet, I would say 2022 will only continue to bear this story out, as will 23, 24, and years to come. Societies that find themselves in this predicament rarely come out well. Already, the data shows over the last several years, it is those at the lowest socioeconomic end of the spectrum, uneducated men specifically, who are dying at a much faster rate, while the life expectancy in the top 5% of American income not only increasing, but is almost 90 years old. Just think about that. The gap in sheer life lived between the richest and the poorest. Inequality isn't just about money, it's about our very lives. Now, as venture capitalist Balaji Srinivasan points out, the Soviet Union also saw a precipitous drop in life expectancy right before its demise, when life expectancy for men in the Soviet Union fell from a high of 65 years in 1987 to 57 years in 1994. In fact, further analyses of Russian life expectancy shows that in the years leading up to the Soviet collapse, for the last few decades, life expectancy was creeping down. Life expectancy is one of those figures which does not care about your theories or individual proclivities. If it's up, things are good. If it's down, things are bad. But to move forward, the hardest part is we have to not only acknowledge it's bad, but then dig really, really deep to fix it. Trends like these are so big they actually feel like a Goliath. The reality is, though, you can turn it around. 76 years is not great for life expectancy, but it's still pretty damn high. Drug overdose accelerated have over a decade. That means, though, if you do it well and you go for it, maybe you can reduce them over a decade. Obesity, too, is one that, yes, of course, it's here to stay, no question. But if you throw everything at the wall and you nip it in the bud, especially for the generation of children, then 30 or 40 years from now, we can reap the rewards. If we don't, decline is our destiny. But it is not inevitable. It is a choice, and I hope that we reject that choice. That's really what comes through. We're sick. Deeply sick.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.